Okay, I hope you can hear me. I don't know how I'm gonna play this, but we'll try. Everyone being handed up to the ground. It is what I mean, Ogden, don't tease. You had guests due for dinner, and they missed the last ferry, and then I showed up and needed a row across Paul's Moss, kneeling in the bow to fend off the rocks. And here we are. Hello, Peter. Patter, he called to Ogden. How are you, Kitty repeated, smiling. Yes, thought Joan, her eyes on Benno as he leaped from the bow with the rope. In his hands and clammed up in the rocks, easily handing it to her. Of course now they could talk, no talk at all of the Wells leaving. They had to stay for dinner. Joan and Anne were dispatched to get the big steamer pot and the sticks of butter from the kitchen and tell Jessie there would be 4 more. The gray was put on the fire and water set to boil. What had been a loose clumping of 2 families soon to be joined became something closer to a party, and the spirit of an evening suddenly pulled together colored the fun. Dino had brought his ukulele, and along with the mussels, they were green glass jugs of the new California wine chilling, now in the water just off the rocks. Ogden was gay tonight, fueling the fire with the driftwood boughs, stirring the flames fire so that the broth boiled around the mussels, directing Kitty to line the paper cups up to receive the butter. Joan felt the heat of the fire on her stubborn skin. The sky lowered from its pink to the deeper curtain of a dense blue, and the fire made a room around their gathering. Aldo chaired the philosophy department at Harvard, and Fanny a lecture in the classics. The minute the spring term ended, the second ended, and Fanny the decamped up in her. No long after Kitty and Ogden, the Wells had brought a boathouse across the Narrow from Crockett's Island and refurbished it with 2 studies, a kitchen, and a long dining room that faced the water. Fanny was English, had won a first at Oxford, but she had first met Kitty Milton. But when she had first met Kitty Milton, she told Joan one summer, I was terrified. American girls seemed capable of doing everything. They were smart, had gone to college, and could speak French, play tennis, ski, sing. Unlike me, she paused, dull as a pond water, able to do nothing at all but turn a phrase. But Mum didn't go to college, Joan had pointed out. It doesn't matter, Fanny Weld pronounced. Look at the place. Your mother created worlds out of the air. Good trip up. Fino arrived beside Joan on the rocks. It was all right, hot. She tossed her paper cup off the rock. Come on, she said, turning and squinting up at him. You can do better than that. Her tease broke the wary hold. He was clearly keeping on himself. His shoulders loosened, and he looked down at her and smiled. And then she found it easy to smile at him after all. Easy because was familiar in having him there besides her, made it clear that there was how it would always be. She needed to say nothing at all. He was as much a part of this place as she was, nothing more. Look, cried Evelyn. Oh, look, everyone is going. The pink and the orange orb hung about that evening, and the color stretched across the sky and touched the granite at the feet into a white glow. Kitty glanced over at Ogden. There, he seemed to say, holding her eyes softened, and she nodded. No one spoke. The sun lowered slowly into the black below, and in an instant it was gone. There, said Kitty, pushing her long body up to the standing. We can keep Jessie waiting. Come on, then. Ogden crossed to her. Ogden. There had seemed to say, holding her gaze. Her eyes softened and she nodded. No one spoke. The sun lowered slowly into the black glow. And then, in an instant, it was gone. There, said Kitty, pushing her long body up to standing. We can't keep Jessie waiting. Come on, then. Ogden crossed to her and offered her his arm. She cocked her head and slipped hers under his. The two of them led the way up the path through the woods, leaving Fino and Moss together. Og set down his glass. Griswold Adam is a good man, of course, said Dad. Beers and the wine, and Joan trailed her mother and father. The laughter of the two men on the rocks curled after her. Fino's low, deep chuckle clapped against the higher notes of Moss' delight. There were candles struck in driftwood, candelabras. There was bread, butter, the jugged wine, and lots of it. There was the genial quiet brought on by food. And when Jessie poked her head around the swinging door with the Irish stew, a cheer went up. Though the Miltons were possessed of one of the most uninspired cooks on the thoroughfare, Jessie made up for it with a sense of ample portions. Unlike the Lowells or the Hunnicuts, the Stinsons, or even the Welds or Crockett's, they were always enough to go around for dinner. Jessie nodded her thanks without so much as to trace a smile. Put the pot down in front of Ogden, handing him the ladle, and vanished back into the kitchen. Kitty followed the swing of the door behind her cook. She had come up with them every summer. Her cook. Jessie had come up with them every summer since the first, complaining bitterly about the difficulties of preparation on the island. She sniffed at the island for the dear Lord's sake, but was the very first to have her bag packed and ready to be shipped up, waiting in the black hallway each June. Kitty sat at the end with Aldo and Roger Pratt. Her eyes rested on Pris, seated at Ogden's right at the other end of the table, with Mox next to her. She caught Ogden's quick glance at the sun and felt keenly happy Moss made him. It was all the line tonight, complete. Dad, enough appealed. Help me out, I'm telling the Pratts about the Worthington Bartletts. Ogden tried to recall them. Your friend Abby was just married. That's right, she nodded. And they are happy as the clams. Except one thing, her cooking. Mr. Pratt hazards. Nothing at all. Evenly shook her fingers at Anne painfully. Abby took her at the Allegiance Française. No, she said and paused. Worthy finds father-in-law hard to take. Og set down the glass. Griswold Adams is a good man, of course. Dad, it's his politics. How on earth do you know that? Og frowned. Abby told us. Abby did. Kitty asked, astonished from the end of the table. How extraordinary. Don't you ever let me hear you talking about Dickie, or what Dickie thinks, young lady, Og whispered. Damn right, Dickie Pratt raised his glass. Thank you, sir. We men must have to stick together. Evelyn swatted him. You see that? He protested, smiling. It was all among friends. Dad, Evelyn turned to her father. Good friends. I don't care how good a friend you are, he answered. The beauty of marriage is that it's private, a jewel. A wife ought never to talk about her husband, and certainly not about his family. Talk tarnishes. His eyes rested on Kitty, who gave him back her smile. He raised his glass. He had been serious, but it needed to be punished. To tarnished love, he said. Tarnished love, Mr. Pratt echoed. In the code of silence, Aldo well teased, upon which it rests. All right, all right. Ogden grumbled cheerfully, but you know, I'm right. Did anyone else catch Mike Wallace this week? Aldo Weld asked, into the quiet that followed as the table started eating. Horrible, Kitty grimaced. Look up. I turned it off. She tried to turn it off. Ogden said, I wouldn't let her. What's that? Roger Pratt asked. Wallace did a show on some Negro up in the Harlem preaching race hatred. Race hatred, whites are the blue-eyed devils. Moss put down the fork. It was called the hate produced. Ogden looked up at the nodded and nodded. Yes, that's right. For a reason, Moss continued, Negroes have a right to be. But why say it? Why have it all out on the surface? Kitty asked. What good does it do? Everyone has black interests at heart. Not the citizens of Montgomery, perhaps, Fanny decided. I meant, Kitty said, everyone at this table. It's not enough, Moss said quietly. It's not nearly enough. Something's got to break. Something's got to break. Not by calling each other names. Everyone needs to keep a cool head. Roger Pratt said. Ogden nodded. Eisenhower was for integration, but gradually Aldo Weld said, leaning back in the chair. Aldi Stenson was for integration, but moderately. Isn't that how the joke goes? But it's true, Ogden frowned. Don't you see the joke, Dad? Moss asked. I see the joke, of course I do. One white man is like another. Moss frowned. Well, no. They're good men, both of them, who meant well. Ogden said, and the country has profited by that sort of man. The country, yes. What about? We do our best to move forward, Moss. That's the only way we move forward. I disagree, Moss shook his head. I'll say backward. You have to go backward. You have to turn around and look at what happened and see why. What exactly are you talking about? Weld Otto leaned, reached for the wine topping upstairs, Pratt's glass behind him. I'm talking about hidden laws, Moss answered. Ogden considered this. Laws are not hidden. Unwritten laws are hidden. Unwritten rules. Hidden and inexorable. Fino agreed. Ogden looked for his son, Tufino, and said to Aldo, the younger generation seems to be ganging up. The hidden laws. Kitty thought impatiently. Why can't we just sit at the table together? Why the need to talk, to raise things up and examine them, to set up separate tables and say, I'm here, you're there. Listen, Ogden, lean back to the chair. I have no illustrations, whatever, about the blacks. They have been poorly treated, ill used from the right. All right, then, how do we bring them in? He looked at his and smiled. Slowly he answered himself. That's how citizens just hold. A leaking fracture bucket not hold, not water. No, said Moss. We need new buckets or something. Bad an analogy. He pushed back from the table and stood up. Beer, he asked without and looking at anyone. I'll take one since you're up. Dickie called out cheerfully, and a bucket or not. Moss notably absently moved toward the pantry and out into the night, where their stars hung in distant canopy over the sky. There were acts to every meal, he thought, creeping forward in the dark toward the rock shelf where he had weighed the beers brought up from the picnic ground. Like a play, or better, an opera. A dinner like this one could set new patterns. The dips in the voice belaying the surge of opinion, the scrapping in and out of chairs, and the chatter that didn't add to much. Quick considering glances and the replies. Act 1 was nearly done and there, and now came the complicating Act 2, where people settled into their food at the conversation, and one could begin in their heart, hear the pure blue strain, the single strain that would bind or divide them. The melody, break it down. Moss hummed himself, break it down, let it go. He didn't worry about what he meant, what it was, the need to break down. Somehow he knew enough to know that it didn't matter. If he could capture the dinner table in the chord, his father's blind assurance, his mother's watchfulness, the ease and arrogance of the old men talk, his sister's laugh, and then step away, so the chord disappeared. Leaving its echo, the movement trace that had been done something. Find some new notes, Grace Miles Davis had said to the drummer 10 years ago, and Moss had set his course by the phrase ever since. Find me some new notes, indeed. Moss pulled a beer off the rock ledge and dug for the pocket knife. The talk in there at the dinner table did not break its borders, though he knew the father thought himself an open-minded man able to talk about Malcolm X at the dinner table like an old song sung at cappella. The old man relied on chords moved through their voices in four ups and downs in tight harmony. The single shoot of sounds, alto, bass, tenor, combined, but never lost, separate but equal. He set the can on the rocks and opened it by finding the lip of the can under the fingers and settling the opener. Segregated sound, each note kept firmly in its place. A star fell above him in the new night sky. The single light simply dropped into motion as though pushed from behind off its black shelf. He followed it all the way down, out of sight, his eye resting at the end, then returning to the squares of the light blazing from the dining room into the night where he stood. He took a long drink. He had a sudden wish that Reg had come, and Reg could see all this. He'd see who Moss was, or rather, who he came from, and Moss was talking about wanting to find new notes. Reg would see what Moss saw and see the need to tear it down. He smiled at himself. Reg would see it and take it in this impossible beauty, held tight in the Milton's well-behaved, civilized hands. Moss tipped the rest of the beer down his throat. He found himself transfixed at the window, unable to go back inside. Around the table, lively, inaudible conversation was going on. His father was leaning in his chair, listening. Moss opened a second beer in his hand and drank, watching as Mr. Pratt told the story. Only half the table paid attention to. Furnace spoke to Anne, and his mother tapped the top of her chair. What's in between? What's in between? The rhythm of the fingers caught him. Phrases swallowing other phrases, and rooms, one room joining another. And moving past, and then stop, and start again. He could hear, just on the outside of the conversation, just past where they had stopped, there was music, and for a minute, for a small instant, he had a glimpse of what he was trying for, a glimpse of how to get all of it, the room, these people, the candles, and the stars out into words, but past words, where it mattered. An easy golden haze spread through him. Evelyn saw just out of the window frame, across from Joni, where Brown Hood was very still, listening also tonight as he crossed with the Howells and the dinghy. It had been Joni's figure. Sitting on the rocks, he caught sight of first. It was always Joni he looked for in a crowd to reassure himself that she was still there. He sipped the beer. He couldn't help it. Anything might have happened. He'd grown up in the shadow of the morning she had always drowned. They had been together, and then he turned around and she simply vanished. She'd been too close to the water tonight. He'd felt watching Ferno Wells shifting in his chair, and Moss saw. He was listening to Anne, and he was watching Joan, who had leaned forward to press the wax at the top of the candle. Fino gazed at Joan with an unguarded confusion, and Joan was somewhere else. Moss could tell. He wondered where. She stood and reached for Mr. Pratt's plate and then her own. Whoever got her would be lucky. Moss Jones stood in the kitchen door, silhouette against the pantry light. Out here, the screen door clamped shut. Against the pantry light, out here, the screen door clamped shut, and he heard the cross through the grass toward him. The two of them stood silent together outside the house. Moss raised his beer to the scene inside. The immortals at dinner. Joan smiled. He was right. Everyone inside looked like they were suspended in time. It makes me want to break something. She glanced at him, startled, half lit by the window. He looked like he was listening to something they could hear, and he looked thrilled. He poured the last of the beer down the throat. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her. "You can see anything on yours broken until it's broken." "Is that right?" She folded her arms. He reminded her of her boss. Just then, it's the same excitement talking on the world. "Was that right?" She folded her arms. He reminded her of her boss. Just then, the same excitement talking on the world. "Then you just have pieces," she said. Beside her, he shook his head. "Pieces to make other pieces." Joan considered this. "You know that feeling you have standing in front of a painting or hearing the last notes of a perfect song, like a bolt shot straight into you, a recognition you are not alone." "But you aren't alone," she said. "Look at all of us. Look at all of this here." "But if I could make something bigger," he was urgent, "something bigger than all of this." Joan watched their mother sit back down. She put her hands on her brother's arm. "Come on," she said, and squeezed. "Let's go in." "There you are," Kitty called, catching sight of the two of them. "Come in." Poor Dickie had been very patient, parched here by my side. "There you are," Kitty called, catching sight of the two of them. "Come in." Poor Dickie has been very patient and parched here at my side. "Hardly, Miss Milton, hardly patient. Heavenly teased, hardly parched." Dickie smiled. Moss handed a cold can of beer to Dickie, followed by the can opener, still in the grip of what he had understood out there in the dark behind him. And without thinking, without pausing, clearing his throat and raising his beer toast. One by one, their faces slowly turned toward him. He pushed his glass up along his nose. "There's a genius out there in this world right now," Moss began slowly. "A man who had figured out how to make us hear great rooms of sounds in which anything is possible. Dr. Miles Davis." He was quite alert suddenly. He stood at the edge of a dive. His mother eyes rested like hands on his silhouette, willing him to sit down. He could simply step and jump. He glanced at his father, who watched him, waiting. Get on with it. He could feel his father's mood. Get on. And push that push. And against that push, Moss straightened. He slowed. He took a good long look at his mother sitting at the end of the table, and he smiled. "And though the order of business here this weekend is you two, Evelyn and Dick, I propose a toast first to infinite varieties." Moss topped. "To sound, leap their barriers, notes that don't stay put. To love in the key of blue." Moss held his beer up. In the puzzled silence, Moss put the beer to his mouth and drank. "Whatever the hell this is," Dickie said, raising his beer. Good-humored. "I'm for it. I'm for you, Moss." Moss was drunk. Ogden realized he would have to shape up. He would have to have a give. He must know it was time to give all this up. He caught his eye and held it. "All right," Ogden almost nodded. "All right, I won't say anything at all." He rose with his glass in his hand. "I leave music to Moss, but love bringing me to my feet," Ogden began. "In my experience, men make lonely music until they find a woman, are just sounding brass. He paused, or a clanging cymbal. "Behind every successful man is a good woman," he smiled, "or so the saying goes, but I suggest a good woman is the reason men put up walls and gardens, churches, the reason men built it all. At the center of every successful man is a good woman." He raised his glass and bowed slightly, first to Sarah Pratt, to Fanny Weld, and then to Kitty. "Tomorrow we'll be over to run." a toast tonight to the good woman at the center, to Sarah, to Kitty, to Fanny, to Pris, and to Evelyn, soon to be there. Moss raised his beer in answer. How clearly his father worked, how cleverly, how cleanly his father worked, how cleverly. He had deflected the conversation, and yet it seemed he had taken it seriously nonetheless. He drank, his eyes on his father, evidently flushed with pleasure. She had gotten her ticket. She would be all set now, and seeing the look on her face, Dickie's own dissolve into a boyish happiness, nearly alarmed by his good fortune. They were exactly right together, neat as pins, Joan thought, without jealousy, and Evelyn these patterns, the light in the dark, the beauty in the brains, although she thought as she moved the salt shaker to stand along the pepper, she was hardly the brains. Her step leaked, but she trapped the glass shaker with her butter knife idly, a little smile on her lips. It leaked gloriously and in hidden ways. Come on, Joan said to Anne across the candles. We good women ought to lead a party down to the dock. Laughing, Joan and Anne rose, their plates in their hands, and Evelyn and Dickie rose as well. Through the doors and out into the dark they went, their voices drifting past the open window at Kitty's side and into the emptied room, where Moss remained turned in on himself. Kitty looked at her son, puzzled. Go on, she said to him. He roused at her voice and looked at her, and as she had held a gaze and realized with a smart what she had pushed away all evening, he reminded her of Dune. He stood at stretched and gave her a little bow, clearing his plate and his beer. The swinging door into the pantry closed behind him, and then the screen door slammed. The old generation sat a moment in the quiet behind them. It was as though they had all shrugged off a coat. No one would say it, but now they could breathe. I want to take the Herreshoff out tomorrow, if it's clear, Ogden said to Kitty early. She nodded, enjoying the faces around the table, all of whom she could count on, all of whom she understood their roles, their places, she thought, rising from her end of the table. Sarah Pratt and Fanny Weld rose also gratefully. Pris did the same, released, happy to follow Kitty out of the dining room and outside to the stand, in the cooler air, into the night, into the quiet. Kitty reached out for the limb of the lilac arching over the door, the familiar branch like an arm in front of her, the long lawn vanishing in the dark. It was a clear night. Ogden would get his sail. Down on the dock, the tiny lights of the children's cigarettes moved slowly back and forth. So this is the guest book, and I think that's the conclusion.